It's bloody freezing here at the moment with we've had some snow flurries, but it's kind of pretty too. The landscape looks pretty. I hope you're all keeping well. And yeah, I was just thinking the other day. I saw an article about absolutely gorgeous Professor Brian Cox, where he said there was no such thing as a soul. Now, this is like, I'm always telling you to deal with these atheists. This is especially for you women who are married to a guy who goes, there's no such thing as the soul. And there's no such thing as anything like that. And humans are just a DNA bank. If you have children with these men, remember that they don't love you or the children. They purely see you as a DNA investment. So the next time your smug, smart arsehole, atheist boyfriend, their husband goes on about, there's no such thing as a soul. Remember, he won't fret when you die, or he won't cry when your children die. He'll get another DNA repository or DNA bank account, because that's all he sees you as. So that's what Brian Cox, the world he comes from, and he says there's no soul. Now this is part of communism, of course, because one of the mantras of the Bolsheviks was there is no soul and the private life is dead. And the private life is the same thing. At the same time, they're telling you there's no soul, so there's no meaningful connection to other human beings. At the same time, they're telling people to have sex on Skype and Zoom and to not date anymore, and the private life is dead, and to have their relationships virtual and online. So it's the Chinese have now won. The Communist Party now runs the world. The Biden administration, as soon as they're in power, the social media is flooded with ads for real Chinese journalists who are all paid spooks, and they're all pictures of attractive Chinese-looking young people who are going to give us the Chinese view of the world and everything from ancient archaeology to environmental issues to current events. And that's the Chinese Governor General of the North American New Territories, Joe Biden. That's what he's there for. That's what he's there for. And one of the first things he did was cancel a massive pipeline for oil power generation that's running through Texas. 100,000 jobs have been lost in Texas alone. And this is also part of the Chinese communist invasion, is to make countries not have enough generation capacity to maintain their economy. After as well as flooding the universities full of spies and everything else, and bribing all the politicians, they also downgrade electrical generation capacity big time. While they're building massive power stations in China that powered by coal and oil, they're getting people in the West to power their country on dream fuel, wind turbines, and close your dirty power stations, just like you closed your dirty factories, and they're all in China now. And it's the most astounding military invasion in the history of the world. I think there's been nothing like it. And the United States has been conquered by the Chinese Communist Party, quite clearly, through using, internal operatives like Amazon and so on. And the Democratic Party, which has transformed itself from an Irish-American crime gang into, this is what they've always had a great history of vote rigging. You watch the movie The Irishman, they show how Joe Kennedy rigged the vote for his kids, and that goes right back to Tammany Hall. So they have that expertise in vote rigging, the Democrats, big time. And so they're no longer an Irish-American gang. They're now the Chinese colonial government within the United States, and they have the power now. Speaking of which, the ones who fell for the QAnon psyop, you're going to see them behaving like a woman whose husband or boyfriend walked out on her, and they'll start turning on Trump. They'll start saying things. You'll start seeing things like, "Oh, he was part of them all along. He was deep state all along." Rather than them admitting that they were dumb fuckers who got sucked up in the QAnon psyop bullshit, they'll attack him personally, and they'll say things, and you'll see the whole thing resurging now, that connecting more and more to Epstein, that they'll show the pictures again of him and his daughter in the back of the limo, and the fake captions that was a child prostitute given to him by Epstein, all that kind of crap the truthers love, and they'll turn on him now, and it'll be just like Be just like those women who have been, some man has had enough of their shit, and then the next thing you know, they're on YouTube, slathering their minge around in front of their 14-year-old kid, and the rest of the world, calling the other person names. That's what they're like. There's the same kind of borderline psychosis, and they will have that, because there's two kinds of cult members. There's people who freely join a cult that already is a cult, and then there's people who become cult members themselves, and they are the cult. They develop the cult, and they become dependent upon it for lots of reasons, mainly because they're tapping into it as a resource, a human resource for themselves. And when that's taken away from them, they go fucking ballistic. And you'll see that too at the QAnon thing. The cult resource has been taken away from them, and the rushes of dopamine they were getting from feeling special from the things like the QAnon bullshit is gone. Now, another interesting fact about the QAnon thing is that the people involved tend to be Protestants. It's very interesting, and that's a huge part of the Christian messianic thing. Now, if you hear me talking in these videos for a long time, Protestants are basically Jewish wannabes. That's what they want to be, and they place an enormous emphasis on the second coming of the Messiah, where Catholics don't, and as much or really at all. And so this you see, the Jews don't believe the Messiah has come yet, so the Messiah is yet to come. Presbyterianism and the Protestants are still the second coming for them has become the what you call it, the substitute for that. So because they're more rabbinical in their nature, they're more conscious of wanting a Messiah, and therefore the QAnon thing played brilliantly into that, I have to say. In fact, there was a great article in medium.com this morning. I read it, and it was a game designer who designs RPG games, showing how that's what QAnon was. It was a game. It was basically a computer game that played the players rather than playing the game itself, and showed all the same kind of methodology used in these kind of role-playing or these one-person shooter games where you go through a corridor kind of thing, and you pick weapons up and so on, or you find clues to get and find a series of connection of switches to get you into the next level. And the QAnon thing played on a generation of people who've been raised on all that stuff very easily, because they were already primed for that from constantly playing games. Now, I've never been a gamer, but I'm going to tell you a story about my computer gaming history, which has come full circle in many ways. Back in the mid-early 1990s, I had the top-end Mac. I don't know what it was, whatever color Mac it was, and because I was making a lot of money at the time, and I bought a game called Marathon. Now, there was three kinds at that time. There were three kinds of the similar kind of games where you go through corridors and you solve puzzles and shoot baddies. There was Castle Wolfenstein, which is kind of like a comedy game, a comedy shoot 'em up cartoon game. There was Quake, which was a bit more sort of like interesting in that there was a theme and a story to it that you followed it. It was a role-playing element to it. And then there was this one called Marathon, which was only on the Apple Mac. Now, Marathon, I'd only really played a few flight simulator games and things like that. I'd never played that kind of a game on a computer. I'd never even played Quake or Castle Wolfenstein at this point. And as soon as I played Marathon, wow, it was like I instantly recognized I was being placed into an alternate reality. If you haven't played Marathon, go look it up on YouTube. Because people play the game on there. Marathon had a story. Basically, you land on this spaceship called Marathon, and on it are these quite disgusting and terrifying entities and monsters and stuff like that, and sort of like human experiments and stuff like this that have been brought, kind of like human vivisection hybrids kind of things. And you move through corridors that often the lights are switched off. And you know that in the darkness ahead of you is some kind of like interdimensional, intergalactic demon or something like that. And a lot of them have a kind of a supernatural, sort of like demonic element about them. And often you'll have to switch the lights on in a part of the spaceship where the lights have failed or it's leaking water. And along the way, you stop at these consoles that have like the Marathon logo, which looks like a kind of a chaos magic sigil, and instructions on the console in green lettering. And the movie, the game, as soon as you start it, you dive right into your consciousness is poured right into it. And I can remember how, like, I'd never been affected by a game like that before. And I can remember going home on the subway in New York and how the subway on an express train where you pass through complete darkness and then the light of a station that's open flies by you, how similar that was to the game Marathon. So the game, and then it wasn't that long after the movie Jacob's Ladder, and it was about a psychedelic drug experiment on which is actually true, on U.S. troops in Vietnam. And Tim Robbins, who's brilliant in it, has these hallucinations of seeing demons on New York City trains and platforms as the trains are speeding by. And that's what I was feeling. I was like, suddenly I'm saying, hold on a second, this is more than a game. This is, and even though I was in mainstream normie land work wise and stuff like that, I'd still kind of maintained my connection back to the chaos magic and the hackers and stuff like that. So I still have that kind of like Fortean consciousness, but but it kept it kept the effect that the game had on my consciousness was very apparent and something I was very aware of right away. And so the marathon game kind of taught me early on that there was something more to the computer world than just entertainment or digital binary things. There was and work. There was actual consciousness altering aspects to the world, to the digital world, to the computer world. And this is around the same time when Wired magazine was a pretty good magazine and would have articles by like Robert Anton Wilson and Terence McKenna and people, and even Colin Wilson, I think we've been there a few times, talking about how, these kind of cybertronic super consciousness ideas. So I was very aware of what was going on, how it was happening, and what it represented. And that's kind of been a good thing because I didn't really have an interest in those games after that. I've never played in most video games or anything. And I don't really have an interest in it. To me, real life is where I'd rather be. But I don't like the compensationary elements of those games. Like you're a loser in real life, but if you win battles in cyber world, you're a hero. There's a lot of that. That's why there's a lot of cowardice among males today because they work out rather than working out their manhood in reality. They work it out virtually in computer games, and that's what happened with QAnon. QAnon, they instead of the reality of the real world happening, they worked it out within computer games, and the RPG game was QAnon. And these were men and adults who had raised on these video games from Quake right on, and they believed that the computer world, the digital binary world, was just as relevant as the real world, coupled with this messianic Christian notion of a a Messiah arriving, a Messiah coming. And this is powerful stuff, and that's why it played heavily on Protestants more than if you look on. I know very few Catholics who fell for it, nearly all Protestants, and no zero pagans. Well, I can't speak for Wiccans because I don't hang out with them, but zero pagans and Wiccans aren't pagans anyway, and it's another form of Presbyterianism. But that it's just fascinating because it was this messianic psychosis, and that's what led them to the march. There's a lot of people who march through the streets with a Q T-shirt on them who are feeling like right fools today. Now, unfortunately, being who these people are, rather than them allowing them to go into a world of self introspection and saying, "How the fuck was I so stupid that I got myself involved in that? What is missing in me, or what is absent in me that drove me to want to believe that this monumental bullshit put on the internet?" And not just that, also these truthers who claimed they had inside information, these YouTube bullshitters that claimed they had inside information from generals in the Pentagon and stuff like that, that a revolution was going to come at the midnight hour before Biden was sworn in. These people will not sit there and ask themselves. They'll either excuse it off or they will most likely turn on Trump. like a jilted lover, like a spurn, like a a delusional fantasist who has this mentality of a perfect life with some man, and when a man says I'm not interested and walks away, they go psychotic rather than actual coming to terms with the fact that they had these delusional psychosis regarding a relationship, that they go into they could go into full smear campaign mode, and you'll see that a lot with these types. They'll be attacking Trump, not left, right, and center. That's human nature, That's human nature. And at the same time, that's also if you look at if you scale that, and that's back to the whole thing again with the Bolsheviks. The soul is dead, the private life is dead. That's all comes out of that. So, these trust operations that were run during the Russian Revolution to believe there was some kind of czarist or, white Russian saviors coming from overseas, and not just as foreign interventionists, but a savior of Russia coming and to save them from the Bolsheviks. And that was deliberately designed by the Bolsheviks in order to destroy people's reality as it became a role-playing game, a trust operation. And that's what QAnon and all these spooks on YouTube are. Now, some of them are just gullible as the rest of them. The Amazing Polly being one of them. I don't think she's a deliberate spook or anything like that, but she's fallen for that crap as well. And if you look at her latest video, she's in total denial. And she looks just like these women that you see, like that they're calling out their psychopath ex online, and they're pretending that everything is okay, but they're an absolute mess inside. You can tell that they're absolutely falling apart inside, and I kind of feel sorry for them in many ways because a lot of it has to do, again, she's a born again Christian and she has this whole thing that the Messiah is coming, and I don't hate that. I think I don't hate the woman or anything, but I look at her and I go, sweetheart, I've seen your story many times in many guises, and it's easier to give it up than to fall apart. You're already starting to look like you're losing your charisma because of it. Just give it up now. Give it up now. And you can see that, like, the charismatic glow that she initially had when she first came on the scene has dissipated because she has to learn how to put the brakes on. But no, we'll see what happens. But I mean, I don't wish the woman harm or anything like that, but I can see the damage already going in there by keeping this fiasco going. Now, this is another, and this is why I'm so anti-Christian. It gives people false hope. It gives people false hope of salvation and messiahs that never arrive, and all that, and that's extended into the private life as well. Like the things like the next boyfriend will be the perfect man, or the next girlfriend will be the perfect woman. They will save me. They will be my savior. And that's, you see, this is why relationships are a catastrophe and so many people are alone. It's because of that. And what relationship they're in are often a mess or dysfunctional in some way. And that's because they're expecting perfection. Perfection. There was that song in the 80s. It's got to be perfect. I mean, that's it. Like they expect their relationships to be like the Lamb of God, completely perfect and innocent. And that's the Christian mind viruses. And I'm not putting down Christians as people. I'm just saying this is where you've been led down the road. This is why I always tell people, if you're going to be a Christian, be a faux Catholic. No, be a Catholic with your back turned to Rome and become a faux Catholic. And that way you can see, one of the Catholics have a much more healthier attitude towards Jesus Christ than Protestants, and I'll tell you why. Protestants see Jesus Christ as this messianic savior who's going to come on Judgment Day and ye shall be judged and all this kind of thing. Catholics have it's funny really, their attitude to Jesus Christ and the synoptic gospels would be more like along the lines of an interdimensional space philosopher, who has like interesting and common sense things to say. And then you kind of leave it at that. Then that's why they're not hung up on the whole thing of him coming back and the second coming. That's enough. And the fact that's what Catholicism is, the kind of like the philosophical sensibilities of the synoptic gospels coupled with what paganism they took over from that. And so that's very interesting. And that's why this is, they've always known these things, this establishment thing. So you have Brian Cox saying things like there's no such thing as a soul. Okay, now this is where the title of the video comes in now. Okay, if you look at totalitarian regimes, particularly totalitarian regimes that involved in mass human rights violations, the Third Reich, the Bolsheviks, the Khmer Rouge, and so on. Even the Planned Parenthood thing in America and the eugenics movement in among wealthy, rich Presbyterians in the West, there was an obsession with cleanliness and disinfectant. I mean, this would be the irony of these things. They would send people off to the gulags with in trains that would take probably a better part of a week to get across to Siberia, and or longer, and they'd put them in a cattle car with straw and a little stove in the middle to boil potatoes on. But one thing that the Bolsheviks did diligently would be to disinfect the rail cars constantly, and they would constantly supply the Gulag prisoners or the transportees with containers of insecticide, pesticide, and herbicides, these kinds of things. There's obsession with cleanliness, killing the pesticide. Now, and the same thing would happen with the Third Reich. For fuck's sake, Zyklon B. People who were about to be shot dead in a pit by the SS with a bullet through the skull would be fumigated with pesticides and disinfectants before they were mass murdered or executed. These kinds of things. There's obsession. You see with the Khmer Rouge when they transported the people into the countryside, when they kept them in those huts living in atrocious conditions, they made sure they were well fumigated with pesticides. And this is the pesticide is really the pesticide and the disinfectant and the herbicides. The totalitarian regimes are obsessed with this. And here we are today in the age of the coronavirus, and everywhere is clean, wash down, disinfectant, kill the virus, kill the virus. Now let me tell you where that comes from. When the private life is dead and the soul is finished, and especially, we're going to deal with the soul part, the atheistic mind then transfers fears of evil and fears of the unseen towards the viral world. So therefore, a seasonal virus, when you have no soul, you don't have kind of like pathological entities, devils, demons, and this kind of thing that can haunt you or kind of become compensatory realizations for real life problems, okay, and issues. They still do the same thing, but instead of like, Beelzebub and, and demons and stuff like that, and Paimon, they transfer it down into the world of microorganisms and bacteria. And this is why they develop a tremendous fear of microorganisms and bacteria. This becomes a terror of microorganisms and bacteria is the mark of the soulless, because they've given up on their souls, and souls have been removed from them, and they've gone away from the spiritual dimension and onto the world of the purely mechanical and the purely scientism. And so therefore demons are replaced by bacterias and viruses. And you see that from Bill Gates to the arsehole that lives down the road who might be wrapped up with the fucking 20 masks on his face and washing constantly and stuff like that, and paying for things with his money in a Ziploc bag, and this kind of thing. Terrified. And then that's the new demon. That's their demons for them. That's their demons. And so this is how do you fight demons? Holy waters. What's the holy waters? Insecticides, pesticides, disinfectants, herbicides. And this is why totalitarian regimes who have removed the soul and removed the private life are completely and utterly obsessed with disinfectant. Because the disinfectant fights the demons of the virus world. Now, if you look at the thumbnail for this video, that's a painting I did back in 2010, which shows the coronavirus. It was from a series of paintings I did at the time called Dreamscapes, and they were paintings of what I saw in dreams. And you look at this painting, and I'll put a link to a better image. Now, you can actually stop the video and look at the thumbnail. Actually, that's better. And you can actually see that there is a person in a sick bed in a state of extreme despondency, in a landscape that's bleak and empty, where nothing is happening, and all that's happening is cold waves of despondency coming over and over again, like the lockdowns. And there in the sky, around the black sun, is the coronavirus, as clear as day. Now, what makes that even more spooky is that in 2019, a few months before the Wuhan terror episode happened. The terror of it, the live snuff movies from Wuhan, which black magic spellbound everyone, appeared. I made a film called Liber Providence about H.P. Lovecraft's pantheon, and I actually reused that painting as in a segment of the film where I talk about in Lovecraft stories. It's not so much the monsters or the entities that destroy people, but the people's fear of the end of the unseen or the unknown that has them destroy themselves, either through things like suicide or madness. And as I'm saying this, I show the coronavirus segment of that painting, and I imposed on it to show the god as an illustration of the god Azathoth, the outer god, the interdimensional sultan daemon at the center of all chaos. I put in a fucking microorganism to actually that I found from a Victorian book of microscope drawings inside the corona of the sun moving. I know it's spooky. It even gets I'll put the link to Lyra Providence below. It even rattled me, especially when people were saying things like, "Well, nobody really knows the size of what the outer gods were. You know, they were interdimensional, so therefore they could exist as viruses as well as they could, the center of galaxies." And it's just the terror. It's just amazing. This thing is a spirit. This thing is a profoundly spiritual battle we're dealing with, but it's not a Christian one. It's not a messianic one. It's not a messianic one. And that's what you have to do. You have to give up. You have to give up this idea of external salvation and start working on yourself. And that's how you get it. You don't get it by sitting around going, "Our leader is coming. Our leader is coming to save us," with a plan. No, you just sit at home and you find your old plan that works for you in your life as a means of escape within a parallel existence. And suddenly, if enough of us did that, we'd all have it anyway. That's how the Soviet Union collapsed. That's how the Soviet Union collapsed. Eventually, everybody one by one said, fuck it, and just walked away. Now, another symbol of communism, and also the concept, the Bolshevik concept of the soul is dead. The soul is dead. The private life is dead. Is also this, and I was going to forget what I was going to say then. Just walk away. It'll come to me. I mean, there's days I get so angry about this, not so much at the control grid and what it's doing, but how people's reactions to it are just so lame. Like, for instance, even in, if you've seen the film Dr. Zhivago, go watch Dr. Zhivago. That's really the story of the times we live in now, told through the stories of a young medical student during the Soviet Revolution. But you watch that now, and at the end, his stepbrother, basically says that what kept the soul of the Russians alive was poetry. And no one loves poetry more than a Russian. Well, actually, I disagree with that. I said you are pretty close. But the poetry. And then you hear things like in England right now, they're removing Chaucer from the college curriculum. Just as like at the same time that the soulless Brian Cox is demanding that philosophy be removed from the curriculum of universities in England. At the same time, you have Joe Biden saying we're only going to have a scientific future. The killing of the soul, the murder of the soul, is central to all this. Where are our poets? Our poets are singing the sonnets of the oppressors. That's where they are. That's where they are. And that's why if you are a songwriter, a poet, a musician, an artist, or a painter, and you see through this whole fiasco for what it is, you have a duty, just like William Butler Yeats said in his poem Under Ben Bulben, to dig it back into the minds of men again. He's the part of the poem where he says, "Poets of Ireland, ply your trade, dig the dead back into the minds." And he makes an analogy between that and a grave digger. Each time the shovel is dug into the ground, the dead are resurrected through poetry and art. And we don't have this now. We don't have this. And this is where those of you who are creators need to do this. That's why people ran to the QAnon thing, because they couldn't run to themselves. Take care. Bye. Love you so.